The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and Judge Patricia Hawkins looked directly at me from behind the mahogany bench. The court recognizes Elena Rodriguez as the newly elected District Attorney of Riverside County. 23 years after my mother told me I'd never amount to anything, her words echoed in my mind as I stood in that courtroom, surrounded by cameras and congratulations. But this story doesn't start with victory. It starts with failure, humiliation, and a woman who was supposed to believe in me more than anyone. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The rejection letter from Stanford Law sat on my childhood desk like a death certificate, and my mother was standing in the doorway with that look. You know the one. Arms crossed, lips pursed, eyes that said, "I told you so," before her mouth even opened. "Well," she said, voice flat as yesterday's soda, "I guess we know where pipe dreams get you. My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm 34 now, but this story really begins when I was 22, fresh out of UC Berkeley with a political science degree and enough student debt to buy a decent used car. I was living back home in Riverside, sleeping in my high school bedroom with the faded Johnny Cochran poster still taped to the wall, dreaming of law school while my mother, Carmen, reminded me daily that dreams don't pay bills. Carmen Rodriguez was 51 then, a woman who'd worked double shifts at the textile factory for 15 years after my father left when I was 7. She had calloused hands, a permanent squint from years of threading industrial sewing machines, and zero tolerance for what she called fancy ideas. To her, education beyond high school was a luxury we couldn't afford, and law school was pure fantasy. "Mija," she'd say, using the Spanish endearment like a weapon, "you need to get your head out of the clouds. Smart girls like you become teachers or nurses, stable jobs, real jobs, not this lawyer nonsense." The Stanford rejection wasn't my first. UCLA Law had said no 3 weeks earlier. So had USC, Loyola, and every other California law school I'd applied to. My LSAT score was decent, but not spectacular. My grades were good, but not outstanding. My personal statement, I now realize, was probably generic and forgettable. But at 22, each rejection felt like the universe confirming what my mother had been telling me all along. I was sitting cross-legged on my twin bed, still in the same position I'd been in when I opened the letter an hour earlier. The paper was thick, expensive feeling, with the Stanford seal embossed at the top. The words swam together after the opening line. "We regret informing you, Elena." My mother's voice cut through my spiral of self-pity. "Your cousin Maria called. They're hiring at the insurance office downtown. Receptionist position. Good benefits." I looked up at her standing in my doorway. Carmen Rodriguez at 51 was still beautiful in that weathered way some women get after years of hard work. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn to the factory every day for as long as I could remember. She wore a faded blue house dress and slippers with holes in the toes she'd been meaning to replace for months. "I don't want to be a receptionist, Mom." She stepped into my room uninvited, picked up the Stanford letter from my desk, and read it with the same expression she used to examine expired milk. "What you want and what you get are two different things, Elena. I wanted your father to stay. I wanted to finish high school. I wanted a lot of things." She set the letter down harder than necessary. "But wanting doesn't put food on the table. This is just one rejection, Mom. I can apply again next year. I can retake the LSAT, improve my score. With what money?" Her voice rose. "You think those fancy schools are free? You think we can afford another year of you not working while you chase this dream?" I stood up from the bed, and we were face to face. At 5'4", I was 2 inches shorter than her, but in that moment, I felt like I was 10 years old again. It's not just a dream. I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was in middle school. Remember when I used to watch court TV and Court TV. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think real law is like television? You think because you can argue with me about doing dishes, you can stand in front of a judge? The dismissal in her voice hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation. For 4 years of college, she'd been asking when I was going to get serious about a real career. When I'd changed my major from business to political science junior year, she'd stopped speaking to me for 3 days. When I'd announced I was taking the LSAT, she'd looked at me like I'd told her I was joining the circus. Mom, I know it's hard to understand, but I'm good at this. My professors said I have a natural ability for legal reasoning. Professor Martinez said I was one of the best students he'd taught in professors. She waved her hand like she was swatting flies. What do they know about the real world? They live in their ivory towers, filling your head with ideas about being important. You're not important, Elena. Neither am I. We're working people. We do honest work for honest pay. And we don't pretend to be something we're not. The cruelty of it took my breath away, not because it was shouted or dramatic, but because it was delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty. To her, this wasn't an insult. It was reality. I could be important, I said quietly. I could help people. You could waste the next 3 years of your life accumulating debt we can't pay back, chasing a career that doesn't want you. She picked up the rejection letter again and waved it. Look at this, Elena. Look at it. These people are telling you no. They're telling you that you're not good enough, not smart enough, not special enough. When are you going to listen? My little brother Miguel chose that moment to appear in the doorway. At 19, he was taking classes at Riverside Community College and working part-time at AutoZone. Miguel had always been the practical one, the one who understood that dreams were luxuries our family couldn't afford. What's going on? He asked, though the tension in the room made it obvious. Your sister got rejected from another law school, Mom said, as if I wasn't standing right there. But she still thinks she's going to be some big-shot attorney. Miguel looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Maybe you should think about the paralegal program at RCC. It's only 2 years, and you'd still be working in law. Even my brother, who I'd always counted as an ally, was suggesting I aim lower. The paralegal program. 2 years to become someone who does the real work so lawyers can take the credit. It was practical, sensible, and everything I'd been raised to accept. I don't want to be a paralegal, I said. I want to be a lawyer. And I wanted to marry George Clooney, Mom snapped. Wanting doesn't make it real. That night at dinner, she made her favorite weapon, rice and beans with chicken drumsticks, the kind of meal that stretches $1 and reminds everyone how careful we have to be with money. Miguel and I ate in relative silence while Mom outlined her practical concerns about my future. Maria's boss at the insurance company is a good man, Mr. Patterson. He promotes from within. You could start as a receptionist, learn the business, maybe become an adjuster in a few years. It's steady work, decent pay. You could move out, get your own apartment. She said, move out, like it was the ultimate goal, the prize for giving. Up on law school, independence purchased with compromise. I could still take night classes, I said, pushing rice around my plate. Study for the LSAT again. With what energy? You think working full-time leaves you with anything left over for studying? She leaned back in her chair, the wooden legs creaking under her weight. Elena, you're smart. I've never said you weren't smart. But smart doesn't always translate to successful. Sometimes smart people have to be practical people. After dinner, I escaped to my room and called my best friend from college, Jessica Chen. Jess had been my study partner, my voice of reason, and my biggest supporter through 4 years of political science classes. She'd gotten into Bolt Hall at UC Berkeley and was starting in the fall. One rejection doesn't mean anything, she said when I told her about Stanford. I know people who got rejected from their top choice and ended up at better schools. You just have to keep applying. With what money, Jess? My mom's right about that part. I can't afford another round of applications, another year of LSATs and prep courses. I'm broke. Then you work for a year, save money, and apply next cycle. Lots of people take gap years. Easy for her to say. Jessica's parents were both doctors. They'd been supportive of her law school plan since she was in high school. They had college funds and connections, and the kind of financial security that made gap years possible rather than desperate. My mom wants me to take a receptionist job at an insurance company, so take it. Make money, save money, apply next year with a better application. You could even study part-time, take some night classes to boost your GPA. After I hung up with Jess, I sat on my bed staring at the Johnny Cochran poster. I'd put it up when I was 15, after watching the OJ trial coverage, not because I supported OJ, but because I was fascinated by Cochran's command of the courtroom, his ability to control narrative and create reasonable doubt through pure legal skill. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. 4 words that had changed the course of American legal history. 4 words that had demonstrated the power of a really good lawyer to reshape reality itself. But maybe my mother was right. Maybe I was confusing television with real life. Maybe my fascination with legal drama was just that, drama. Maybe I was the kind of person who was meant to watch lawyers on TV, not be one. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next morning, Mom had already called Maria and set up an interview for me at Patterson Insurance. She announced this over coffee and toast like she was doing me a favor. Thursday at 10 o'clock, wear your black dress, the one from graduation. And put your hair up. You look more professional with your hair up. Mom, I didn't say I wanted the job. Elena. She set down her coffee mug with a sound like a judge's gavel. You are 22 years old. You have a college degree and no job. You are living in my house, eating my food, using my electricity. You will go to this interview and you will be grateful for the opportunity. The word grateful hit me like a slap. Grateful. As if accepting defeat was something I should thank her for. That afternoon, I drove to the Riverside Community College campus and picked up a catalog from the admissions office. The paralegal program was exactly what Miguel had described. 2 years, evening classes available, job placement assistance. The kind of practical compromise that would make everyone in my family proud. I sat in my car in the parking lot, flipping through the catalog pages. Criminal law for paralegals. Legal research and writing. Civil litigation procedures. It wasn't law school, but it was law adjacent. It was a foot in the door, but it wasn't what I wanted. And sitting there in that community college parking lot, I realized that what I wanted might not matter. Not to my mother, not to my family, not even to the admissions committees who kept sending me rejection letters. Thursday morning arrived with the subtlety of an earthquake. Mom was up at 6 making noise in the kitchen, pulling out the iron to press my interview dress, generally behaving like a stage mother preparing for opening night. Remember, she said, watching me apply lipstick in the bathroom mirror. This isn't about you. This is about what you can do for Mr. Patterson's business. Don't talk about yourself too much. Ask questions about the company. Show interest in learning. I nodded, but inside I was screaming. Everything she was telling me to do felt like instructions for surrendering. Don't talk about yourself. Don't take up space. Be grateful for whatever crumbs they offer you. Patterson Insurance was housed in a bland office building downtown, sandwiched between a tax preparation service and a bail bondsman. The waiting room had beige carpet, motivational posters about teamwork, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Mr. Patterson turned out to be a thin, nervous man in his 50s who spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. He asked me about my typing speed, whether I was comfortable with multi-line phones, and if I had reliable transportation. He didn't ask about my college degree, my career goals, or why someone with a political science education wanted to answer phones at an insurance office. The position starts at $12 an hour, he said, glancing at a paper on his desk. Full-time hours, basic health insurance after 90 days. We're closed weekends and major holidays. $12 an hour. I calculated quickly in my head, about $24,000 a year before taxes. Enough to move out of my mother's house, barely enough to make car payments and rent and still have money left over for food. That sounds very reasonable, I heard myself say. Good. Maria speaks very highly of you. Can you start Monday? I was 22 years old, with a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley, and I had just accepted a job that a high school graduate could do. Walking back to my car, I felt like I was in a dream. Not a good dream, the kind where you're trying to run but your legs won't move fast enough. When I got home, Mom was waiting with a smile broader than I'd seen since my graduation day. How did it go? I got the job. I start Monday. She hugged me. Actually hugged me. Something she hadn't done in months. I'm so proud of you, Elena. You're being smart. You're being practical. This is how you build a real life. That night at dinner, she told Miguel the news like I'd just been appointed to the Supreme Court. Elena got the job at Patterson Insurance. Full-time, with benefits. She'll be making her own money, contributing to the household. Contributing to the household. Another way of saying I'd been a burden, and now I was earning the right to exist in her home. Miguel congratulated me with the enthusiasm of someone who'd watched a friend choose the safe path over the dangerous one. That's great, Elena. Mr. Patterson's got a good reputation. You could probably work your way up in a company like that. Work my way up. From receptionist to what? Senior receptionist? Office manager? The kind of modest promotion that would let me afford a slightly better apartment, a slightly newer car, a slightly more comfortable version of the same limited life. After dinner, I called Jess to tell her about the job. That's great, she said, but I could hear the concern in her voice. You can save money for next year's applications. Yeah, I said. Next year. But we both knew what would happen next year when this year gets comfortable. We both knew how easy it is to let temporary solutions become permanent ones. Friday night, Mom made a special dinner to celebrate my new job. Carnitas with fresh tortillas, Spanish rice, refried beans made from scratch. The kind of meal she usually saved for birthdays or holidays. Miguel brought home a bottle of Martinelli's sparkling cider, and we toasted my new career in insurance. To Elena, Mom said, raising her plastic cup of cider. For finally being sensible. Finally being sensible. Finally accepting that wanting something and deserving something were different things. Finally understanding that dreams were for other people with different last names and different bank account balances. I smiled and clinked my cup against hers, but inside I felt like I was attending my own funeral. Elena, who had dreamed of arguing cases in front of judges, who had imagined cross-examining witnesses and writing legal briefs, who had believed she could be important, that Elena was dying, and everyone in my family was celebrating. That weekend, I cleaned out my desk drawer and put all my law school preparation materials in a box. LSAT prep books, practice tests, personal statement drafts, copies of applications I'd never been able to afford to complete. I carried the box to the garage and set it on a shelf between Christmas decorations and old tax returns. Sunday night, I ironed 5 blouses for my first week of work. I practiced answering phones in a cheerful voice. Patterson Insurance, this is Elena. How may I help you? I rehearsed the kinds of conversations I'd be having. Policy renewals, claim questions, appointment scheduling. Monday morning, I woke up at 7, showered, dressed in my interview outfit, and prepared to begin the practical life my mother had planned for me. In the kitchen, she handed me a cup of coffee and a piece of toast with a smile that said she'd finally gotten through to me. I'm proud of you, she said again. You're going to do well there. Mr. Patterson is lucky to have someone as smart as you, smart as me. Smart enough to answer phones and file papers and make coffee for people who had chased their dreams and caught them. I kissed her goodbye, got in my car, and drove toward downtown Riverside, toward Patterson Insurance, toward a life that would be comfortable and safe and completely wrong for me. But I didn't know that yet. At 22, sitting in traffic on my first day of work, I thought this was surrender. I thought this was the end of the story. I had no idea it was actually the beginning. 6 months into my career at Patterson Insurance, I had perfected the art of being invisible. I answered phones with the right tone, filed claims with the right precision, and smiled at Mr. Patterson's jokes about my overqualification. The work wasn't difficult. It was soul-crushing in its simplicity. But I was good at it, efficient. Enough that Mr. Patterson had started giving me additional responsibilities without additional pay. "Elena," he said one Tuesday morning in October, sliding a stack of files across my desk. "I need you to review these liability claims and flag anything over 10,000. The adjusters are backed up, and you have a good eye for details." A good eye for details. It was the closest thing to praise I'd received in months, and it should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like being handed a slightly more interesting cage. The claims were fascinating despite myself. Car accidents, property damage, personal injury cases. Each file told a story of someone's worst day, reduced to forms and dollar amounts. I found myself reading beyond what was necessary, analyzing the legal arguments, questioning the settlement amounts. There was one case that stuck with me. A rear-end collision where the insurance company was denying coverage because they claimed the insured had violated policy terms by using their personal vehicle for business purposes. The claim looked legitimate to me, but the adjuster had marked it for denial based on a technicality that seemed questionable at best. I spent my lunch break researching California vehicle insurance law on the public library computers. What I found made my blood pressure spike. The insurance company's interpretation was legally dubious, relying on contract language that probably wouldn't hold up in court. They were counting on the claimant not knowing enough to fight back. When I returned from lunch, I did something that would have horrified my mother. I knocked on Mr. Patterson's office door. "The Morrison claim," I said, placing the file on his desk. "I think we might be making a mistake on the coverage denial." Mr. Patterson looked up from his sandwich with the expression of someone who'd just been interrupted during their favorite TV show. "Elena, your job is to flag high-dollar claims, not second-guess our adjusters." "I understand, but I researched the contract language, and I don't think it supports a denial. The policy defines business use as regular commercial activity, but Morrison was just giving his coworker a ride home. That's incidental use, not business use." He stared at me for a long moment, then flipped through the file with the air of someone humoring a child. "The adjuster has 15 years of experience. I think he knows how to read a policy. But what if he's wrong? What if Morrison gets a lawyer and sues? We'd be liable for bad faith denial, and that could cost us a lot more than just paying the claim." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Patterson closed the file with a snap and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not annoyed, not dismissive, but genuinely angry. "Elena, I'm going to say this once. You are a receptionist. You answer phones and file papers. You don't practice law, you don't interpret contracts, and you certainly don't tell me how to run my business. Are we clear?" The dismissal was so complete, so devastating that I actually took a step backward. I was just trying to help by doing your job. Nothing more. I walked back to my desk with my ears ringing and my face burning with embarrassment. Around me, the office continued its normal rhythm. Phones ringing, printers humming, adjusters discussing claims in the language of liability and negligence. But I felt like an alien who'd just been reminded that she didn't belong. That night, I told my mother about the confrontation over dinner, expecting sympathy or at least understanding. "What were you thinking?" she said, setting down her fork with enough force to make the plate rattle. "Elena, you've been there 6 months. 6 months, and you're already making trouble?" "I wasn't making trouble. I was trying to—" "You were trying to show off. You were trying to prove you're too smart for the job they gave you." She shook her head. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You can't just do the work. You have to make it about being better than everyone else." Miguel, who'd been quietly eating his dinner, finally spoke up. "Maybe Elena's right about the claim, though. I mean, if she researched it, it doesn't matter if she's right." Mom's voice rose. "It matters that she's making waves when she should be grateful to have a job at all. You think Mr. Patterson is going to promote someone who questions his decisions? You think he's going to give raises to employees who think they know better than their supervisors?" The word grateful again. Always grateful. Never right, never smart, never worthy of respect, just grateful. "Mom, what if they fire someone who's trying to save them money? What if they promote someone who shows initiative and legal knowledge?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Legal knowledge. Elena, you read some articles at the library. That doesn't make you a lawyer." "It makes me more qualified than someone who doesn't read anything at all." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Miguel stared at his plate. Mom stared at me with an expression that mixed disappointment with something that might have been fear. "You're going to lose this job," she said quietly. "You're going to lose it because you can't accept what you are. And when you do, don't come crying to me about how unfair life is." 2 weeks later, Mr. Patterson called me into his office again. This time, there was a woman I didn't recognize sitting in the chair across from his desk. Mid-40s, sharp, suit, briefcase at her feet. "Elena, this is Janet Morrison. She's an attorney representing the Morrison family in their claim dispute." My stomach dropped. The Morrison claim, the one I'd tried to flag as problematic, the one Mr. Patterson had dismissed. "Ms. Rodriguez," Morrison said, standing to shake my hand. "I understand you've been involved in reviewing my client's file." I glanced at Mr. Patterson, whose face had gone slightly gray. I just flagged it for review. According to my client, someone from your office called him yesterday and suggested he might want to consult with legal counsel about the denial, someone who seemed very familiar with insurance law. The blood drained from my face. I had made that call. After stewing about the Morrison case for 2 weeks, after watching Mr. Patterson rubber stamp the denial despite my concerns, I had called Morrison from my personal phone during lunch break and suggested, very carefully, that he might want to get a second opinion on the coverage decision. "I was trying to help," I said weakly. "Help?" Mr. Patterson's voice could have frozen water. "You called our insured and advised him to hire an attorney? Against your own employer?" Janet Morrison cleared her throat. "Actually, Mr. Patterson, what Ms. Rodriguez did was quite ethical. She saw a potentially bad faith denial and tried to prevent your company from making a costly mistake. My client's claim is clearly covered under the policy, and frankly, your denial was so legally unsound that we're considering a bad faith lawsuit." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "However, my client is willing to settle for the original claim amount plus reasonable attorney's fees if you'd like to avoid litigation." Mr. Patterson looked like a man watching his house burn down. "How much are we talking about?" $60,000 for the original claim, plus $15,000 in attorney's fees. A bargain, really, considering that a bad faith judgment could be 3 times that amount. After Morrison left, Mr. Patterson and I sat in his office in the kind of silence that precedes executions. He stared at his desk, his hands folded, his breathing shallow. $75,000, he said finally. "Because you couldn't. Mind your own business. Mr. Patterson, if we'd just paid the original claim, if you had just done your job, we wouldn't be in this mess." He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Fear that his small business couldn't absorb a $75,000 loss. Fear that other claims might be similarly vulnerable. Fear that his 15 years of experience might not be worth as much as he'd thought. I have to let you go, Elena. I can't have an employee who works against the company's interests. I wasn't working against the company. I was trying to protect the company from a bad faith lawsuit. By advising our insured to hire an attorney. By advising him to get a second opinion on a denial that was legally wrong. The words hung in the air between us. Legally wrong. I had said it out loud. The thing we'd both been dancing around for 6 months. I wasn't just a receptionist who'd gotten too big for her britches. I was someone who understood the law better than the people making legal decisions. Clean out your desk, he said quietly. I'll have your final check ready by 5. Walking back to my desk felt like the longest journey of my life. My coworkers studiously avoided eye contact, but I could feel them watching me pack my few personal items into a cardboard box. 22 years old, fired from my first real job for being too smart for my own good. The drive home was a blur of self-recrimination and mounting panic. How was I going to tell my mother that I'd been fired? How was I going to explain that my first act of professional courage had ended in professional disaster? Mom was in the kitchen when I walked through the front door at 3 in the afternoon, hours earlier than usual. She took one look at my face and the cardboard box in my hands, and her expression shifted from surprise to resignation. They fired you. Yes. For what? I told her the whole story, the Morrison claim, my research, the phone call, the attorney's visit. With each detail, her face grew more pinched, more disappointed, more certain that this outcome had been inevitable. $75,000, she repeated when I finished. You cost them $75,000. I saved them from potentially paying 3 times that in a bad faith judgment. You got yourself fired for sticking your nose where it didn't belong. I got myself fired for trying to do the right thing. The right thing? She laughed, that bitter sound I'd learned to dread. Elena, the right thing was to do your job and keep your mouth shut. The right thing was to be grateful for steady work and not rock the boat. But you couldn't do that, could you? You had to prove how smart you are. What if I am smart? What if I actually do know more about the law than the people making decisions? Then, you should have gone to law school. The words exploded out of her with such force that we both flinched. But you didn't get into law school, remember? You got rejected. They told you that you weren't good enough, and instead of accepting it, you've spent 6 months pretending to be something you're not. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just the words, but the timing, the precision with which she'd aimed for my most vulnerable spot. Maybe they were wrong, I said quietly. Maybe you're delusional. That night, I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Janet Morrison. She'd been confident, articulate, completely comfortable, wielding the law like a precision instrument. She'd walked into Mr. Patterson's office and turned my disaster into her client's victory, using nothing but legal knowledge and professional skill. She'd done exactly what I'd dreamed of doing since I was 15. She'd been exactly who I'd always imagined becoming. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that felt like emerging from fog. I couldn't keep living my life according to my mother's expectations. I couldn't keep accepting other people's limits as my own reality. I couldn't keep pretending that wanting something desperately didn't matter, just because it was difficult to achieve. I got dressed, drove to the Riverside Public Library, and spent 4 hours researching law schools that offered part-time evening programs, schools that catered to working adults, schools that might look more favorably on a candidate with real-world experience, even if that experience had ended in termination. I found 3 possibilities: Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles, Western State University in Fullerton, and University of West Los Angeles. All offered part-time evening programs. All had application deadlines in the spring. All would require the LSAT, letters of recommendation, and personal statements explaining why I wanted to be a lawyer. This time, I knew exactly what to write about. When I got home that afternoon, Mom was waiting in the kitchen with a newspaper folded to the classified ads and a red pen in her hand. "I found 3 reception positions and 2 data entry jobs," she said without preamble. "You need to start making calls." "I'm not looking for another receptionist job." "Elena, you were fired. You can't afford to be picky." "I'm going back to school." She stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "School? What school?" "Law school. Part-time evening program. I can work during the day and take classes at night." The red pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. "Elena, no. We've been through this. You got rejected, remember? You're not law school material." "I'm exactly law school material. What happened at Patterson proves it." I understood. The law better than someone with 15 years of experience. I saved a client from getting cheated, and I prevented the company from a worse lawsuit. "You got fired. I got fired for being right." We stared at each other across the kitchen table, and I realized this was the moment everything would change. Either I would back down again, accept her version of reality, and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been, or I would stand up for the person I knew I was meant to be. "I'm taking the LSAT again," I said. "I'm applying to evening programs. I'm going to be a lawyer, Mom, with or without your support." "With what money? You don't have a job. You can't even afford the application fees." "I'll find a way. Elena." Her voice softened, taking on the tone she'd used when I was little and needed to be protected from my own bad decisions. "Honey, I know you think you're smart enough for this, but smart isn't everything. Those schools rejected you once. What makes you think they'll accept you now? Because now I have a story to tell. Now I know why I want to be a lawyer, not just that I want to be one." She shook her head slowly, as if I were a terminal patient refusing treatment. "You're going to end up disappointed again. And this time, you'll be older, deeper in debt, and even further behind your peers who made practical choices. Then I'll be disappointed. But I won't be wondering for the rest of my life what would have happened if I'd tried." That night, I pulled the box of law school materials down from the garage shelf and spread everything out on my desk. LSAT prep books, practice tests, sample applications. Everything I'd put away 6 months ago when I'd accepted defeat. But I wasn't the same person who'd packed that box. Elena, who'd been crushed by rejection letters, had never stood up to her boss about a legal principle, had never researched complex insurance law on her own time, had never been willing to sacrifice her job for what she believed was right. Opened my laptop and started typing. "My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I want to tell you about the day I got fired for being right about the law." The LSAT prep book felt different in my hands this time. Heavier, more significant, like holding a weapon I finally knew how to use. It was January 15th, 2013, and I had exactly 4 months to prepare for the June test. 4 months to prove that getting fired from Patterson Insurance was the beginning of my story, not the end. I'd been working at a temp agency for 3 weeks, taking whatever assignments they had: data entry at a medical clinic, filing at a construction company, answering phones at a dentist's office. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid enough to cover my car payment and contribute to household expenses while I studied. My daily routine had become military in its precision. Up at 5 a.m. to study logic games before my temp assignment. Lunch breaks spent reading comprehension passages in whatever break room I happened to be in that week. Evenings dedicated to logical reasoning until my eyes burned. Weekends were marathon. Study sessions at the library where I could spread out practice tests and work uninterrupted. Mom had stopped talking to me about law school entirely. She'd moved on to a strategy of aggressive silence, making dinner for 2 instead of 3, discussing Miguel's community college classes with pointed enthusiasm, asking about my temp work with the tone of someone inquiring about a terminal illness. "How was your day at the clinic?" she'd ask over dinner, her voice carefully neutral. "Fine. Busy." "Good. Steady work is important." The subtext was deafening. Steady work, reliable income, the kind of job that doesn't end with you getting fired for having opinions above your station. But 3 weeks into my new routine, something unexpected happened. The temp agency called with a different kind of assignment. "We have a position at Rodriguez and Associates," the coordinator told me over the phone. "It's a small law firm downtown. They need someone who can handle phones, filing, and basic legal research. The attorney specifically requested someone with college education and strong analytical skills. Rodriguez and Associates." The name made me smile. Finally, a Rodriguez who had made it to the other side. The law firm occupied the 3rd floor of an older building on Main Street, with narrow hallways and offices that felt like libraries. The waiting room had real law books lining the walls, not the motivational posters and generic art I'd grown accustomed to at Patterson Insurance. Maria Rodriguez, no relation, despite the name, was nothing like I'd expected. She was maybe 40, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her office was controlled chaos, case files stacked on every surface, legal texts bristling with sticky notes, a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Attorney." "Elena," she said, standing to shake my hand, "the temp agency says you have some experience with legal research." "Basic insurance law," I said carefully. I had to research policy language and coverage issues at my last job. "Good. Because what I really need is someone who can dig into case law and statutes without needing their hand held. I'm a solo practitioner handling family law, personal injury, and small business litigation. I do my own research, but I'm drowning." "In it?" She gestured to a desk in the corner of her office, barely visible under stacks of legal briefs. "The pay is $15 an hour, and I'll warn you up front, this isn't a typical temp job. I need someone who can think, not just file. Can you handle that?" 15 an hour was $3 more than Patterson had paid me. But more importantly, she was talking to me like I had a brain. "I can handle it." "Excellent. Your first project is researching California's statute of limitations for professional malpractice claims. I have a potential client coming on Friday, and I need to know exactly where we stand on timing." That afternoon, I dove into legal databases with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been starving for intellectual challenge. Professional malpractice law was complex, with different limitation periods depending on the type of professional, when the harm was discovered versus when it occurred, and whether continuous treatment told the statute. By Thursday evening, I had compiled a 15-page research memo with case citations, statutory references, and a clear analysis of how the law would apply to Maria's potential client. I'd also identified 3 recent appellate decisions that could strengthen the case, and 2 potential procedural traps that needed to be avoided. When I handed Maria the memo Friday morning, she read it with the focused attention of someone grading a final exam. After 10 minutes, she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before: professional respect. "This is excellent work, clear, thorough, and well-reasoned. Where did you go to law school?" "I didn't. I have a bachelor's in political science, but I've been studying law on my own." She stared at me for a moment, then flipped back through the memo. "You wrote this without formal legal training?" "I used the same research methods I learned in college, just applied to legal databases instead of academic ones." "Elena, this is better than the work I've gotten from law students. Hell, it's better than the work I've gotten from some attorneys." She set the memo down carefully. "How would you feel about staying on permanently? Not as a temp, but as my paralegal?" My heart started beating so hard I was sure she could hear it. "I don't have paralegal certification." "You don't need it in California if you're working under attorney supervision. I can teach you the procedural stuff, how to draft pleadings, organize discovery, prepare for depositions. But what you just showed me, that analytical ability, that's something you either have or you don't. I'd love to stay." "Good. Start you at 18 an hour, with raises based on performance. And Elena? If you're serious about law school, this experience will be invaluable. You'll see how the law actually works, not just how it looks in textbooks. That night, I called Jessica Chen to share the news. She was halfway through her first year at Bolt Hall, struggling with civil procedure and questioning whether she'd made the right choice. "You're working at a real law firm?" she said, and I could hear genuine envy in her voice. "Elena, that's amazing. You'll be learning practical skills while I'm stuck memorizing the federal rules of civil procedure. How's law school really?" "Hard. Really hard. And expensive. And sometimes I wonder if I'm just accumulating debt to learn things I could pick up working at a firm." She paused. "Actually, what you're doing might be smarter. Get real experience first, then go to school with some context for what you're learning." After we hung up, I sat in my room looking at my LSAT prep materials with new eyes. I was still planning to take the test, still planning to apply to evening programs. But now, I had something more valuable than good grades or test scores. I had proof that I could do the work. The next few months flew by in a blur of legal research, client meetings, and case preparation. Maria turned out to be an excellent teacher, walking me through the mechanics of legal practice with patience and precision. I learned to draft motions, organize exhibits, prepare witness outlines, and navigate the maze of court procedures. More importantly, I learned to think like a lawyer. Not just about the law as an abstract concept, but about how legal principles applied to real people's problems. The divorcing couple fighting over custody, the small business owner whose contractor had disappeared with half the payment, the elderly woman whose insurance company was refusing to pay for her husband's medical bills. Each case was a puzzle, and I discovered I was good at finding the pieces that didn't fit, the arguments that could change outcomes, the procedural moves that could shift the balance of power. In March, Maria handed me a case that would change everything. Thomas Chen, no relation to Jessica, was a 67-year-old retired teacher whose pension had been miscalculated by the school district. For 8 years, he'd been receiving payments that were $300 a month less than he was entitled to. The district claimed it was too late to fix the error, citing a statute of limitations on benefit adjustments. "They're probably right about the statute," Maria told me. "But I want you to research it thoroughly. Sometimes there are exceptions or workarounds that aren't immediately obvious." I spent a week diving into pension law, reading cases about benefit calculations, studying the specific statutory language governing teacher retirement systems. The district's position seemed solid. There was indeed a 3-year statute of limitations on challenging benefit calculations. But on Friday afternoon, buried in a footnote in an appellate decision from 2009, I found something interesting. The statute of limitations didn't begin running until the beneficiary had actual knowledge of the miscalculation. Not constructive knowledge, not when they should have known, but when they actually knew. The key was in Thomas Chen's file. For 8 years, he'd been receiving annual statements that showed his benefit calculation. But the statements were dense, technical documents filled with actuarial formulas and abbreviations. A reasonable person wouldn't necessarily understand, from those statements, that an error had been made. Chen had only discovered the miscalculation when his wife died, and he'd contacted the retirement system about survivor benefits. The customer service representative had inadvertently revealed that his monthly payments were incorrect. If the statute of limitations began running from the date of actual knowledge, when he learned about the error, rather than the date, the error was made, then Chen's claim was timely. I drafted a motion arguing that the statute had limitations that had not expired, supported by case law and statutory interpretation. But more than that, I crafted a narrative about how the retirement system's own confusing documentation had prevented Chen from discovering the error sooner. Maria read my draft motion twice before looking up at me with something approaching amazement. "Elena, this is brilliant. You found an argument I would have missed completely." She paused, tapping her pen against the desk. How do you feel about arguing this motion in court? My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean standing up, in front of Judge Morrison, and making this argument yourself. Under California law, certified paralegals can make certain appearances in court under attorney supervision. You're not certified yet, but you could take the exam. The paralegal certification exam. I'd been putting it off, focusing on law school preparation instead. But if passing it meant I could actually argue in court. When's the next exam date? 2 weeks. 2 weeks to study for an exam I should have been preparing for over months. 2 weeks to prove I could handle the responsibility Maria was offering. 2 weeks to take the first real step toward the career I'd been dreaming about. I'll take it. The California Advanced Certified Paralegal exam was 4 hours of multiple-choice questions covering legal research, civil procedure, ethics, and substantive law. I studied with the intensity of someone whose future depended on it, which, I was beginning to realize, it did. The night before the exam, Mom found me at the kitchen table with flashcards and practice tests spread out like a war map. "What's all this?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and wasn't pleased about it. "Paralegal certification exam. If I pass, I can appear in court on behalf of clients." She sat down across from me, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "Elena, you've been working at this law firm for 3 months. 3 months. Don't you think you're moving a little fast?" Fast toward what? Toward actually using my abilities? Toward doing work that matters? Toward getting ahead of yourself again? Her voice was gentle, but the message was clear. Remember what happened at the insurance company. You thought you knew better than people with more experience, and it didn't end well. This is different. Maria asked me to take the exam. She wants me to argue the motion. And what happens when you lose? What happens when the judge decides you don't know what you're talking about? I looked at her across the table, and suddenly I understood something that had been nagging at me for months. She wasn't trying to protect me from failure. She was trying to protect herself from my success. If I became a lawyer, if I achieved the dreams she'd dismissed as impossible, it would mean she'd been wrong about me, about what I was capable of, about the limits she'd spent my whole life insisting were real. "I might lose," I said quietly, "but I'm going to try anyway." The exam was held in a windowless conference room at a hotel near LAX, filled with paralegals, legal assistants, and career changers like me. 4 hours later, I walked out feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, but cautiously optimistic. Results would be available in 2 weeks. The Chen motion was scheduled for the week after that. If I passed the exam, I'd be standing in front of a judge arguing my first case just days after getting my certification. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I'd been a rejected law school applicant living in my mother's house with no prospects. Now I was potentially days away from arguing in court. Maria called me at home on a Tuesday evening in May. "Elena, you passed, scored in the 95th percentile." I sat down hard on my bed, still holding the phone. "I passed?" "You didn't just pass. You aced it, which means next Thursday you're going to walk into Department 12 and argue the Chen motion. Are you ready for that?" Ready? I'd been ready since I was 15 years old, watching Johnny Cochran command that courtroom. I'd been ready since the day I researched insurance law to help a client who was being cheated. I'd been ready every day. I'd spent answering phones and filing papers while dreaming of something bigger. I'm ready. When I hung up, I could hear voices in the kitchen, Mom and Miguel discussing his plans for the fall semester. Normal family conversation about normal family things. I thought about going downstairs to share the news, to tell them I'd passed the exam and would be arguing in court next week, but I knew what would happen. The concern disguised as congratulations, the warnings about getting too confident, the subtle reminders that success wasn't permanent and failure was always just one mistake away. Instead, I opened my laptop and began preparing for the argument of my life. Thomas Chen deserved better than $300 a month in stolen pension benefits, and I deserved the chance to prove that sometimes being right is worth every risk you take to be heard. Department 12 of Riverside County Superior Court felt like a cathedral built for the worship of justice. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, and the kind of silence that makes you whisper even when you're alone. Judge Patricia Morrison, the same judge who would later announce my election as district attorney, presided from a bench that seemed designed to intimidate. I sat at the counsel table in my best suit, a navy blue jacket and skirt I'd bought, at Nordstrom Rack with my first paralegal paycheck. My hands were steady as I arranged my notes, but my heart was beating loud enough that I worried the court reporter could hear it. Across the aisle, the school district's attorney looked like Central Casting's idea of legal authority. Silver hair, expensive suit, briefcase that probably cost more than I made in a month. Harold Westbrook had been representing government entities for 30 years, and his entire demeanor suggested this motion was a minor inconvenience in his otherwise distinguished career. "Counsel, state your appearances," Judge Morrison said, without looking up from the file. "Harold Westbrook for Riverside Unified School District, Your Honor." I stood, and my voice came out clearer than I'd expected. "Elena Rodriguez, certified paralegal appearing for petitioner Thomas Chen under the supervision of Maria Rodriguez, counsel of record." Judge Morrison looked up then, studying me with the expression of someone trying to place a face. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is your first appearance in my courtroom." "Yes, Your Honor." "Welcome. I assume you're prepared to present Mr. Chen's argument regarding the statute of limitations?" "I am, Your Honor." What followed was 15 minutes that changed my life. I walked Judge Morrison through the timeline of Thomas Chen's case, explaining how the school district's confusing benefit statements had prevented him from discovering the error until 8 years after it occurred. I cited case law, quoted statutory language, and argued that actual knowledge, not constructive knowledge, should govern when the limitations period began to run. Westbrook responded with the condescending tone of someone addressing a precocious child. "Your Honor, Ms. Rodriguez's argument is creative, but ultimately misguided. The statute clearly states that the limitations period begins when benefits commence, not when an error is discovered. To rule otherwise would open the floodgates to stale claims. But I was ready for that argument. I'd anticipated it, researched it, and prepared a response that hit back with precision. "Your Honor, if I may respond," I said, standing again. Mr. Westbrook's interpretation would create an absurd result. It would mean that beneficiaries are required to independently verify complex actuarial calculations they have no training to understand, using documentation that even certified public accountants would find challenging to interpret. I pulled out an exhibit, a copy of one of Chen's annual statements, and held it up for the court to see. This document contains 47 different line items, uses 17 different abbreviations without explanation, and references 12 separate statutory provisions. To suggest that Mr. Chen should have deduced from this that his benefits were miscalculated is to impose an impossible burden. Judge Morrison took the exhibit and examined it for a long moment. I could see her working through the complexity, recognizing the validity of my argument. "Mr. Westbrook," she said, "how do you respond to Ms. Rodriguez's point about the complexity of the benefit statements?" For the first time, Westbrook looked uncertain. "The law doesn't provide different standards based on document complexity, Your Honor. Citizens are presumed to know their rights." "But citizens aren't presumed to be actuaries," I interjected, then caught myself. "I apologize for speaking out of turn, Your Honor." Judge Morrison almost smiled. "The interruption was inappropriate, but the point is well taken. Mr. Westbrook, I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Rodriguez. The statute of limitations should run from actual knowledge, not from the theoretical possibility of knowledge." 20 minutes later, we had our ruling. The motion was granted. Thomas Chen's case could proceed, which meant he was entitled to 8 years of back benefits plus interest, nearly $30,000. Outside the courthouse, Thomas Chen hugged me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "My wife always said the system was fair if you knew how to work it. You proved her right." Maria was waiting by my car, grinning like a proud parent. "How does it feel to win your first motion?" "Like I want to do it again." "Good, because you're going to." "That was impressive work there, Elena. You handled Westbrook like a seasoned attorney." The victory lasted exactly until I walked through the front door at home. Mom was in the kitchen, and her expression made it clear she'd heard about the court appearance from someone, probably Miguel, who had a talent for sharing news at exactly the wrong moment. "So," she said, not looking up from the dishes she was washing, "I hear you were in court today." "I won. Congratulations." The word came out flat, empty of any actual congratulation. I sat down at the kitchen table, still wearing my court suit, still buzzing with the energy of victory. "Mom, I argued a motion in front of a judge and won. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" She turned around then, dish towel in her hands, and I saw something in her eyes that took me a moment to identify. Fear. Real, deep, bone-level fear. It means you're getting ahead of yourself again. It means you won one case and now you think you're ready to conquer the world. It means I'm good at this. It means maybe I was right about law school, about what I'm capable of. Elena. She sat down across from me, and her voice took on that careful tone she used when she was trying to manage my expectations. "You're working as a paralegal. That's a good job, a steady job. But it's not being a lawyer. It's a step toward being a lawyer. Or it's as far as you're going to get." The words hung between us like a challenge. She wasn't congratulating me on my success. She was warning me not to interpret it as evidence that bigger successes were possible. "What are you really afraid of?" I asked. The question caught her off guard. She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it again. "I'm afraid you're going to get hurt," she said finally. "I'm afraid you're going to reach for something that's out of your grasp and fall harder than you fell before. Or, I'm afraid I'm going to succeed, and that will mean you were wrong about me." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, mother and daughter, separated by more than just different dreams. "I've never been wrong about you," she said quietly. "I know exactly who you are. You're smart, you're determined, and you don't know when to quit. Those can be good qualities, but they can also be dangerous ones." Dangerous to whom? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Dangerous to her worldview, which required that people like us stay in our lane, accept our limitations, and be grateful for modest progress. That weekend, I drove to UCLA to meet Jessica for coffee. She was finishing her first year of law school, looking tired but more confident than I'd seen her since high school. "Elena, you argued in court?" she said when I told her about the Chen case. "That's incredible. Some of my classmates haven't even been inside a courtroom yet. How's school?" "Brutal, but I'm surviving. Constitutional law is killing me, but I love civil procedure. Weird, right?" She laughed. "Listen, there's something I want to talk to you about. My professors keep asking about real-world legal experience. They say students who've worked in firms before law school have a huge advantage. Makes sense. Elena, you should seriously consider applying this year. With your paralegal experience and that court victory, you'd be a much stronger candidate than you were 2 years ago." I'd been thinking the same thing. My LSAT score from the previous year was still valid, and Maria had offered to write me a letter of recommendation that would carry real weight with admissions committees. "The problem is my family," I said. "My mom sees law school as this impossible fantasy. Every success I have just makes her more convinced I'm setting myself up for a bigger fall. Maybe that's her issue to deal with, not yours." That night, I sat in my room with law school applications spread across my desk. The personal statement prompts felt different than they had 2 years ago. Now I had a story to tell, about discovering my abilities despite other people's limitations, about succeeding in environments where I wasn't supposed to belong, about refusing to accept other people's definitions of what was possible. But even as I started writing, I could hear my mother's voice in my head, warning me about reaching too high, reminding me that wanting something didn't make it achievable, insisting that practical choices were the only safe choices. The next few months were a carefully orchestrated balance between pursuing my dreams and managing family expectations. I threw myself into paralegal work with renewed intensity, taking on complex research projects and building a reputation at the courthouse for thorough preparation and clear arguments. Maria started giving me more responsibility, allowing me to take depositions under her supervision and draft increasingly sophisticated legal documents. By September, I was handling caseloads that would have challenged junior attorneys. But at home, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Every professional victory was met with subtle warnings about overconfidence. Every mention of law school applications was countered with reminders about practical alternatives. The breaking point came in October, when Maria offered me something I'd never expected, a chance to teach paralegal classes at Riverside Community College. "The instructor position pays well," she explained, "and it would give you credibility with law school admissions committees. Plus, teaching forces you to understand the material at a deeper level." Teaching. Standing in front of a classroom, sharing legal knowledge with students who were starting their own journeys toward careers in law. It felt like a natural extension of everything I'd been building. When I told my family about the opportunity over dinner, Miguel was enthusiastic. "Professor Rodriguez," he said with a grin. "That sounds official." But Mom's reaction was immediate and sharp. "Elena, you've been a paralegal for less than a year. Don't you think teaching is a little premature?" "Maria thinks I'm ready." "Maria isn't thinking about your long-term stability. She's thinking about her own convenience." The accusation stung because it was so unfair to Maria, who had invested more in my career development than anyone in my family ever had. "Mom, this is a good opportunity. It pays well, it looks great on law school applications, and I enjoy teaching." Law, school applications. She set down her fork with the kind of precision that meant this conversation was about to escalate. "Elena, when are you going to stop chasing this fantasy? When are you going to stop calling my career goals fantasies? When you start having realistic career goals, the argument that followed was our worst yet. Years of accumulated frustration poured out in accusations and counter-accusations. She was holding me back. I was ungrateful for her sacrifices. She was afraid of my success. I was naive about the world. It ended with me packing a bag and driving to Jessica's apartment in West LA, where I spent the night on her couch and tried to figure out how to love a mother who seemed determined to limit my potential. "You can't live your life according to her fears," Jessica said the next morning over coffee. "At some point, you have to choose between making her comfortable and making yourself proud." I drove back to Riverside the next afternoon with a clarity that felt like emerging from underwater. I found Mom in the kitchen, preparing dinner with the mechanical precision of someone who had been thinking hard about difficult things. "I took the teaching job," I said without preamble. She looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Elena, and I submitted my law school applications yesterday. Evening programs at 3 schools. I start classes next fall if I get accepted." We stared at each other across the kitchen counter, and I realized this was the moment our relationship would either evolve or break entirely. "I don't want you to get hurt," she said finally. "I don't want to spend my life being afraid of getting hurt. What if you fail? Then I'll fail having tried everything I'm capable of, instead of failing because I never tried at all." She turned back to her vegetables, and I could see her shoulders shaking slightly. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. "I don't know how to be proud of something that terrifies me." "Maybe that's something you'll have." to figure out. That night, I moved back into my childhood bedroom for what I hoped would be the last time. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally running towards something bigger than my mother's fears. The teaching position started in January. Law school acceptance letters would arrive in March. Either way, I was done living according to other people's limitations. I was Elena Rodriguez, paralegal, teacher, and future attorney, whether my family was ready for that person or not. March 15th, 2014. The acceptance letter from Western State University College of Law arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was grading paralegal exam papers at the kitchen table. Thick envelope, heavy paper, the words, "Congratulations," visible through the address window. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it, remembering the thin rejection letters from 2 years earlier, the disappointment that had nearly derailed everything. But this time was different. This time I had a story worth telling, experience worth valuing, and the confidence that comes from proving yourself in the real world. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, it began, we are pleased to inform you of your acceptance into Western State University's Evening Division JD program, beginning fall 2014. Acceptance. Not just acceptance, but acceptance with a partial scholarship based on my paralegal experience and community college teaching record. They wanted me. They saw value in what I'd built, potential in what I could become. Mom was at work, Miguel was at his community college classes, and I was alone in the house with the biggest news of my life. For a moment, I considered calling her at the textile factory, interrupting her shift to share the victory. But I knew how that conversation would go. The cautious congratulations masking deeper concerns. The reminders about evening programs being more difficult than traditional day school. The questions about how I'd balance work and classes and whether I was sure this was practical. Instead, I called Maria. Elena, that's wonderful. Her voice carried genuine joy, the kind of celebration I'd been craving from my family. Western State has an excellent evening program. Their graduates practice all over Southern California. I can't believe it's real. I can. You've earned this, Elena. Every bit of it. That afternoon, I drove to the Western State campus in Fullerton, a sprawling complex of modern buildings that somehow managed to look both impressive and approachable. I walked through the law library, past study groups of evening students who looked like me, older, more focused, balancing legal education with real-world responsibilities. The financial aid office confirmed what the acceptance letter had outlined. Partial scholarship covering about 40% of tuition, with the remainder manageable through student loans and continued paralegal work. It would be challenging, but not impossible. 3 years of evening classes, 4 nights a week, while maintaining my day job and teaching responsibilities. I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward, looking at the building where I'd spend the next 3 years, and called Jessica. Elena, I knew it, she said when I told her the news. This is incredible. You're going to be amazing in law school. I'm terrified. Good. That means you're taking it seriously. But Elena, you've already proven you can think like a lawyer. Now you just need to learn the technical stuff. That evening, I waited until after dinner to share the news with my family. Mom was washing dishes, Miguel was watching TV in the living room, and the house felt settled in its routine of modest expectations and careful dreams. I got accepted to law school, I said to her back. She turned around slowly, dish towel in, her hands, and I saw her face cycle through surprise, concern, and something that might have been resignation. Western State? Full-time evening program. I can keep working during the day and teaching at RCC. Miguel appeared in the doorway, drawn by the conversation. Elena, that's awesome, law school. But Mom was quiet, studying my face like she was trying to read a map written in a language she didn't quite understand. How much is it going to cost? She asked finally. I told her about the scholarship, the loans, the manageable payment structure. I explained how I'd budget my time between work, school, and family obligations. I laid out the practical details with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned that dreams needed blueprints to become reality. 3 years, she said when I finished. 3 years of night school while working full-time. People do it. The program is designed for working adults. And what happens if it's too much? What happens if you can't keep up with everything? There it was again, the assumption that I would fail, that reaching for something difficult was inherently dangerous. But this time, her concern felt different. Less like judgment and more like genuine worry about someone she loved taking on too much. Then I'll figure it out, I said. But Mom, I'm not the same person who got rejected 2 years ago. I've proven I can succeed at this level of work. She sat down at the kitchen table, and I could see her wrestling with something bigger than just my educational plans. Elena, she said finally, you know I never finished high school. The admission hung in the air between us. I'd known, of course, but we'd never talked about it directly. I got pregnant with you when I was 17, and your father, well, you know how that ended. I spent your whole childhood working jobs that didn't require education, watching other people get promoted because they had degrees I couldn't afford to get. She looked up at me, and I saw vulnerability in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. When you wanted to go to college, I was proud but scared. When you talked about law school, I was terrified. Not because I didn't think you were smart enough, but because I thought the world would break your heart the way it broke mine. Mom? But watching you these past 2 years, the paralegal work, the teaching, the way you handled that court case, I realize I've been protecting you from my failures instead of preparing you for your successes. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had about my dreams, her fears, and the space between what she'd experienced and what I might achieve. I'm still scared, she continued. Law school is expensive and difficult, and there are no guarantees. But Elena, you're not me. You're not 17 and pregnant and out of options. You're 24 and educated and surrounded by people who believe in you. Does that mean you believe in me? She reached across the table and took my hand, the first time she'd done that in months. I've always believed in you. I just forgot how to show it. The next 3 years were a blur of case law and contract theory, of studying until 2 a.m. and then getting up at 6 a.m. for work. Evening law school was exactly as challenging as everyone had warned, but also exactly as manageable as I'd hoped. My days developed a rhythm: paralegal work from 8 to 5, dinner with family, law school from 7 to 10, studying until midnight. Weekends were for legal research, paper writing, and the kind of intensive preparation that evening students need to compete with their full-time counterparts. Mom adapted to the new routine with surprising grace. She started making sure there was always a plate of dinner waiting when I got home from class. She learned not to schedule family events during exam periods. Most importantly, she stopped questioning whether law school was practical and started asking how classes were going. The breakthrough moment came during my second year, when I was selected for the law review and invited to compete in the national moot court competition. The night I told her about making law review, she actually smiled. Not the careful, worried smile I'd grown accustomed to, but genuine pride. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I'm in the top 10% of my class. It means other students and professors respect my work. It means I'm going to graduate with honors. It means I was wrong about what you could achieve," she said quietly. By my third year, I was working as a teaching assistant for first-year students, helping them navigate the same challenges I'd faced. I loved the mentoring aspect, the chance to guide other working adults who were balancing legal education with real-world responsibilities. Professor Sarah Martinez, who taught criminal law, started suggesting that I consider prosecution work after graduation. "You have the analytical skills for complex cases," she told me after class one evening. "But more than that, you have the communication ability to make complicated legal concepts accessible to juries. Have you thought about the district attorney's office?" "The DA's office," I hadn't, actually. I'd been so focused on getting through law school that I hadn't spent much time imagining what came after. Most of our evening students go into private practice, I said. Family law, personal injury, business litigation. Most evening students don't graduate summa cum laude with law review honors, she replied. Elena, you could have a career in public service. You could be the kind of prosecutor who makes the system work better. That night, I researched the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, reading about their internship programs and entry-level positions. The work looked challenging but meaningful, protecting victims, prosecuting criminals, advocating for justice in the kind of courtroom where I'd first discovered my abilities. I applied for a summer internship and was accepted immediately. The internship led to a job offer as a deputy district attorney, starting the week after my bar exam results were announced, July 15, 2017. Bar exam results day. I was at work when the email arrived, sitting at the same paralegal desk where I'd spent 5 years learning that I was capable of more than anyone had imagined. Congratulations, the email began. You have successfully passed the California bar examination. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then printed the notification and walked it to Maria's office. I passed. She looked up from the brief she was editing, saw the paper in my hands, and broke into the kind of smile that makes you remember why you work so hard for other people's respect. Elena Rodriguez, Esquire, she said. How does that sound? Like something I never thought I'd hear. That night, my family took me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Riverside, the kind of place we'd never been able to afford when I was growing up. Mom wore her best dress and kept looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. 2. Elena, Miguel said, raising his glass of sparkling cider, who never gave up on herself even when the rest of us didn't know what to believe. To Elena, Mom echoed, who taught me that dreams aren't fantasies if you're willing to work for them. I started as a deputy DA the following Monday, assigned to misdemeanor cases and traffic violations, the legal equivalent of medical residency, where new attorneys learn courtroom skills on low-stakes cases. But even arguing parking ticket appeals felt like victory after everything I'd been through to get there. The years that followed were a steady climb through the ranks of the DA's office. Misdemeanors led to felonies. Felonies led to special assignments. Special assignments led to supervision of other attorneys. Each promotion was evidence that the girl who'd been told she'd never amount to anything was building exactly the career she'd dreamed about. In 2021, when District Attorney Robert Chen announced his retirement, several senior prosecutors were mentioned as potential successors. I wasn't among them, yet. But I'd built enough of a reputation for complex case prosecution and victim advocacy that when I announced my candidacy, the legal community took notice. The campaign was everything I'd never expected to want, and everything I'd always been preparing for. Months of town halls and fundraisers, of explaining my vision for criminal justice reform and community prosecution. Mom attended every campaign event, wearing a button with my name on it and introducing herself to strangers as Elena's mother. Election night, November 2nd, 2022. The returns showed me winning with 63% of the vote, a larger margin than anyone had predicted. As the results became clear, I found myself surrounded by supporters, reporters, and campaign volunteers, all celebrating a victory that had taken 15 years to achieve. But the moment that mattered most came when I spotted Mom in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, clapping until her hands must have hurt. "I'm proud of you," she said when I reached her. "I'm so proud of who you became despite everything I couldn't see." 3 months later, Judge Patricia Morrison administered the oath of office that made me the youngest district attorney in Riverside County history. The same judge who'd presided over my first motion as a certified paralegal now watched me promise to execute the duties of chief prosecutor with integrity and skill. The court recognizes Elena Rodriguez as the newly elected district attorney of Riverside County. The gavel came down with the sound of thunder, and I thought about the girl who'd been told she'd never amount to anything, about the rejection letters and the insurance job and the mother who'd been so afraid of my dreams that she'd almost convinced me to abandon them. But mostly I thought about the Thomas Chen case, where I'd first learned that being right was worth fighting for, even when nobody expected you to win. Especially when nobody expected you to win. After the ceremony, as I stood in the courthouse hallway receiving congratulations from colleagues and community leaders, Mom approached with something in her hands, a small, framed photograph. It was my old Johnny Cochran poster from high school, the one I'd stared at while dreaming of legal careers that seemed impossible from our small house in Riverside. "I found this in your old room," she said. "I thought you might want it for your new office." I took the frame and looked at the image of Cochran in his courtroom element, commanding respect and attention with nothing but legal skill and unshakable confidence. "Thank you," I said, "for keeping it, for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for teaching me that some dreams are worth the risk of believing in them." That night, I sat in my new office, District Attorney Elena Rodriguez, the nameplate read, and called Jessica Chen, now a successful immigration attorney in Los Angeles. "District Attorney Rodriguez," she said when she answered. "I like the sound of that. It's still surreal. Elena, do you remember what you told me the night you got fired from Patterson Insurance?" I thought back to that conversation, to the desperation and determination that had driven me to law school despite every obstacle. I said I was tired of other people defining what I was capable of. And look what happened when you stopped listening to them and started listening to yourself. After we hung up, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the city lights of Riverside, thinking about all the cases I'd prosecute, all the victims I'd advocate for, all the young attorneys I'd mentor who might be struggling with their own family's limited expectations. Tomorrow, I'd begin the work of administering justice in the county where I'd grown up, where I'd been told to accept less, where I'd learned to demand more from myself and from the world around me. But tonight, I was just Elena Rodriguez, who'd finally proved that sometimes the people who tell you that you'll never amount to anything are the ones who need to learn what anything really means. My mother had been wrong about my limits, but she'd been right about one thing. I was exactly who she thought I was, smart, determined, and someone who doesn't know when to quit. The difference was, I'd finally learned that those weren't weaknesses to overcome. They were strengths that would carry me as far as I was brave enough to dream. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads. I took the frame and looked at the image of Cochran in his courtroom element, commanding respect and attention with nothing but legal skill and unshakable confidence. "Thank you," I said, "for keeping it, for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for teaching me that some dreams are worth the risk of believing in them." That night, I sat in my new office, District Attorney Elena Rodriguez, the nameplate read, and called Jessica Chen, now a successful immigration attorney in Los Angeles. "District Attorney Rodriguez," she said when she answered. "I like the sound of that. It's still surreal. Elena, do you remember what you told me the night you got fired from Patterson Insurance?" I thought back to that conversation, to the desperation and determination that had driven me to law school despite every obstacle. I said I was tired of other people defining what I was capable of. And look what happened when you stopped listening to them and started listening to yourself. After we hung up, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the city lights of Riverside, thinking about all the cases I'd prosecute, all the victims I'd advocate for, all the young attorneys I'd mentor who might be struggling with their own family's limited expectations. Tomorrow, I'd begin the work of administering justice in the county where I'd grown up, where I'd been told to accept less, where I'd learned to demand more from myself and from the world around me. But tonight, I was just Elena Rodriguez, who'd finally proved that sometimes the people who tell you that you'll never amount to anything are the ones who need to learn what anything really means. My mother had been wrong about my limits, but she'd been right about one thing. I was exactly who she thought I was: smart, determined, and someone who doesn't know when to quit. The difference was, I'd finally learned that those weren't weaknesses to overcome. They were strengths that would carry me as far as I was brave enough to dream. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.